Hey guys, welcome back to the Beyond Return show with Gabriel and Robinson. We have a special episode today. This is going to be the first one that we hope to repeat a few times that's actually got a guest on it. We're going to throw some tough questions at our guest today. He's an awesome guy, someone I've worked with for a while and known for a few years. His name is Vineet Prasad. He's a financial coach with Savings Academy. If you guys are ready, let's dive in.
Thanks, Robinson, and thanks, Gabe. I appreciate you both having me on today. Big fan from previous episodes I've watched in the past, so it's great to be here.
You're in a tiny cohort of elite viewers of our show. Thank you for being on. I thought we'd start by getting a little bit of background. Vineet, I know you've got a story. I've heard it many times, but maybe our viewers could hear your background about how you got where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give the spoiler up front, what I do right now is I'm a financial coach and I run a Savings Academy, a financial coaching business. But how it started was I was very fortunate that my mom growing up had taught me really well about saving, kind of building that habit in from a young age, kind of teaching me how to manage money. And when I got into the professional world, my inclination and the person I ended up meeting as well, and my partner were both really big savers. But I came to realize that a lot of other people struggle a lot with saving regularly and kind of tracking where their money goes each month, and just having clarity around that. I was going on a hike at just near Stanford, and a friend of a friend had come along. I started talking about personal finance. This was back when I worked in tech. And he because it was a hobby of mine, and he had asked me some questions, said, "Hey, I'm really struggling with this stuff." Was, great on him for opening up and sharing, and said, "Would you be down to talk through this, after work sometime?" And I said, "Absolutely. I love thinking about, this kind of stuff." And he became the first ever person I worked with around finances, and I loved it, kind of helping him create a budget or spending plan and stay on track with it, understand where his money was going. It was thrilling to help him, increase the amount of money he was putting towards savings, building up savings. And I kept doing that on the side while I was working at Facebook. You had to sign this form that says, you're doing this other business, doesn't conflict. Turns out that it didn't conflict with Facebook, so that was good. And eventually it got to the point where I had a lot of beta clients, then real clients, and I was loving it. Was doing it nights and weekends, and then I decided to take it full time, and I've been doing it full time for 2 years now, helping the kind of core goal of what I'm doing is to help millennial professionals pay down debt, build savings, and just feel confident around their finances.
I love it. This is in our little background things. I always ask you about this, Vineet, but you have I love accents, all accents, and you have like this little twinge of, I would call it like slightly British accent. Where did you grow up, and where did you get your extremely unique accent?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I was born in London, in the UK, and my parents were both from India but grew up in London, so they both have really strong British accents. And I moved to the US when I was young, but I think just because of my parents, I've ended up with this slight hybrid of an accent. So I appreciate you asking. It's gotten weaker over time. Stephanie, my wife, says it was a lot more British when I was in college, and she feels like she's lost out on that over time.
A little bit of a left field question here. So we just heard a little bit about what you do, how you help clients. Back to your parents, how would your parents describe what you do for a living?
My parents are pretty clued into what I do. So I think they'd say he runs a business that helps people save money. I think that's what they would say.
My mom was asked what I do for a living, and she couldn't answer. She said, "Yeah, helps people with money." I always wonder how people got into where they are right now. So, what things really influenced you to get into personal finance coaching?
Yeah, good question. I think couple experiences. One, when I first started working out of college in a consulting role, I had a first time I had bills, and I was out on my own, and I was working in a job. I had a bit of a fear at first, like what would happen if I lost my job, and I started like learning more. I had already had a pretty good background, but I started learning more about personal finance, and I came across the financial independence movement, which I'm sure you're both familiar with, but started reading some of the bloggers like Mr. Money Mustache and some of the others, and learned about that philosophy that like, savings, and then later investing can create freedom for you. And you eventually want to get to the point where you're doing work just because you want to and not because you need the money. And that was very appealing to me, as that I imagine is appealing to a lot of people. And so I started saving a very high percent of my income. And it just became a nerdy like thing I enjoyed doing on the side and enjoyed talking about. I went to some of the meetups at Stanford. There was a group that would meet up of tech folks who were on the FIRE path. And so that's why it just became a fun thing for me. And so when eventually somebody asked me, for help with figuring out themselves, it was awesome to get to do that.
Vineet, if you could briefly give us an idea of today, as you stand now, a couple years in and having done this, nerding out, as you say, on it for a long time, how do you manage your own personal finances? What does the day-to-day look like for you?
I'll focus on the budgeting, cash flow stuff. But I use a tool called Tiller Money, which I know you're familiar with, but for those who aren't, it's a tool in Google Sheets. Well, it's a service that pulls your transactions daily into Google Sheets, just like Mint or some of the other budgeting tools do. But because I like spreadsheets and I like the flexibility they allow, it allows me to do a lot of customizations. And so in terms of process, weekly, most weeks we do it weekly. Stephanie, my wife, and I sit down and we take 5-10 minutes to just look at the transactions from the last week and categorize them and say, okay, that's what we roughly spent. And then each month we'll do a little bit, the first week of the month, we'll do a little bit more of an in-depth review and see, okay, here's how much we planned to spend, here's how much we actually spent. And we'll also just update, we have a balance sheet, so assets and debt, that we update ourselves each month. So that's kind of my main process. At the end of the year, we'll also do kind of a like in summation, kind of look at how everything looked for the year. But yeah, we've been doing that for at least a monthly budgeting process now for 7 or 8 years. And I think that's been a huge reason why we've been able to consistently save.
I love that. 7 or 8 years. That's awesome.
How do you inspire Stephanie to do these categorizations with you? I find that one of the most difficult parts.
Yeah, good question. So I'm very fortunate that Stephanie and I think very alike in terms of finances. Like her parents, raised her in a very similar way. And so she wants to do it as well. But I think it's also okay for one person to be like, when I work with both folks, I think it's okay for one person to be the accountant and to like do the like data, cleaning and categorization. And then the other person, to review, monthly or weekly and just take a look and make sure they have awareness of what's going on. And I find that process often the partner who isn't the accountant or isn't doing the transactions will often be like, oh, that can't be right. Let me look at how there's no way we spent this much on clothes or food. Let's look into that, and they'll dive in with you. So I think that's okay for one person to be the categorizer as long as both people are engaged in kind of reviewing.
Yeah, that's my struggle here. Trying to find
it's just engagement.
Yeah, I think it's mostly engagement, but I also think it's I would say it's initiative, right? It's always coming from my end, not from hers, right? So it is a little, that's kind of like where I struggle, and we've gotten better at it, but still, there's always something better to do than to categorize transactions. And I categorize most of hers. There's obviously some of them that have no idea, what the purpose of that transaction was. I use Tiller as well. I love it. It's an amazing tool. I've been with them since practically the beginning, and I recommend all my clients to use it just as a spending tracker. That's all, just so they know how much from my end, where I need Tiller to be, where it's useful at least, is I need them to be able to tell me with certainty how much they're going to be able to save in a year, right? Because that savings amount, the capacity to save, is an input into the retirement plan.
And one thing I can share that's like worked on the initiative side a little bit for folks I've worked with, and it's not, doesn't make it perfect, but I'll do with folks is I'll have them pick a specific time of the day or a specific day of the week, a specific time, and then like create a calendar invite or reminder for that time for both people. Like both people will get that invite and reminder. So it's like when, the person who's maybe leading the initiative says, okay, it's time for our, monthly budget review or our weekly categorization, then both people got the notification. It's like, they're both aware of it. And so maybe, either person can bring it up. And then I think one of the things that helps my clients do it a lot more frequently is that I check in the day after because I have access to their Tiller sheet. And so I'll, gently remind them if they haven't done it the day after. And so they start to realize like, okay, if I said it, we're going to do it Wednesday evening, like Vineet's going to check in on us if we haven't. So
you actually know when they're supposed to do it.
Yeah. Yep. Because they've told me they've committed to a time and date of each week that they'll review it. And with folks, like I think with cash flow, there's folks who are doing really well at it. And if they're saving a significant percent, over 20% of their income, then okay, maybe use it more as a tracking tool and just understand really how much money are you saving and really how much are you spending. But if someone is struggling with cash flow, like they're not saving much at all at the beginning, which is a lot of my clients, and I really want them like using it as an awareness tool on a weekly basis. Like I want them understanding, their cash flow on a weekly basis, and I can, dive deeper into kind of how I do that with folks. But I think monthly, just having at least an awareness weekly is very helpful.
Oh, that's very helpful. So the weekly is kind of like the timing that you would recommend. Mm-hmm, yeah, I think we do it twice a weekly, and not twice a week, like twice a month. And I would say that we forget sometimes what each transaction is because the description is sometimes vague, right? But the amount. You probably could remember the amount for a week, but not for 2 weeks.
Exactly. And I actually find that when people do it weekly, it actually should take about the same amount of time as, just doing it once a month, because when you do it once a month, you've forgotten half the transactions. Whereas weekly, you should be able to do it it's like 5 minutes a week versus, maybe 30 minutes in a month. So
can you describe the difference I think most of our audience probably knows what a financial advisor, financial planner does. Can you describe from a high level the difference in what you do versus what financial planners do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll use an analogy that I really like, and you've heard a number of times, which is I think a financial planner is kind of like a primary care physician in that they touch all aspects of your financial life, and they, investing, insurance, et cetera, and including cash flow. A financial coach, or at least the way I approach financial coaching, is more like a personal trainer in that they're with you, helping you with that cash flow and debt payoff kind of savings element week in, week out, month in, month out. Whereas most financial planners, I think, they might help you at a higher level with cash flow, but they're, not as much week in, week out helping folks actually increase their savings because they're focused across such a wide variety of problems. Like a doctor is going to tell you, okay, you need to eat this much, eat this many calories, or maybe exercise this amount of time, but they're not going to be there with you, making sure that you do it each week and helping you, iterate on how you do it. So that's the analogy I'd use.
I like that. Is it fair to say, pulling on that analogy further, that accountability is a big part of what you end up doing with clients?
Yeah, absolutely. That's, I think, the biggest value I provide. I think the three elements I break it down into of just like what I do in general is, one, I help people gain an understanding of where their money is going, awareness. Two, I help people create a realistic plan. Most people's instinct is to, once they realize like, oh my gosh, I'm spending way more than I thought, in this area, to do a crash diet approach. Okay, I'm just going to, I thought I was spending $400 a month on dining out. I'm actually spending $1,500 a month. well, I'm going to cut that to 200 a month, and not tell you how, but just say they're going to cut it. And then when they look the next month and they're like, oh, I actually spent $1,200, then they might just think, I suck at budgeting, I'm going to give up. So number 2 is creating a realistic plan, understanding how you're going to make changes. And number 3, which is what you just touched on, is staying on track, like helping people stay on track, stay motivated, being positive around budgeting and cash flow, because it's such an area of shame, guilt, fear for a lot of people who struggle with it, that helping people get back on the horse when they feel like they've messed up is a lot of what I do.
This next question, I feel like I could have made the entire episode just about this, because I have so many questions about how it works, but I want to get into the idea of the rotating savings account. Maybe we could start from a high level. When I say rotating savings account, what does that mean to you?
So I call it rotating or revolving savings, and I didn't come up with this idea. I discovered it, but the idea is we tell people that they need an emergency fund, and it's 3 to 6 months of expenses or 3 to 6 months of income, and that's what you need for savings. That's what generally almost people say that you need. The problem that I've persistently seen is people create this emergency fund, they put money into it, and then they go on a vacation. Okay, they have to pull all the money out of the emergency fund. They have repairs, they have to pull a lot of the money out of their emergency fund. And it becomes demoralizing because that, okay, this emergency fund is not supposed to be, it's supposed to be there for emergencies. And so I really like to break them out into 2 pieces. One is the emergency fund, and that really is a one-way street. Money goes in and money doesn't come out. For most people, I like to think of that as an unemployment fund. It's there if they lose their job, like or like a catastrophic medical emergency that their insurance isn't able to cover, but really it's there for losing your job. And then the revolving savings account is there for everything else that's kind of a spiky, unusual expense, like vacations. If you expect that you're going to go owe income taxes, that goes in there. When you figure out your annual average repair, maintenance and repair costs for your car, for your home, kind of adding all of that up, dividing it by 12 and for on an annual basis, and then saying, okay, this is the monthly amount I need to put in to this rotating savings account. So just very quick example, if it was just, you realize you're going to have $1,200 per year on your car repair and $6,000 a year on vacations. Okay, well, that works out to $100 a month plus $500 a month in total. So you put $600 a month into this rotating savings account. And then when vacation time comes, you pull the money, from there into your checking account, and it's there. It's like, whereas a lot of people, will use a credit card for those purchases. That kind of gets you into dangerous ground sometimes if you're struggling with managing your cash flow. I don't think everybody needs to use this. If you're struggling with managing your cash flow, and a good symptom of that is, have you paid interest on a credit card? If you've paid interest on a credit card or persistently done that, then you're probably struggling to manage your cash flow. And I would recommend the rotating savings account approach.
Why is it called rotating or revolving?
Great question. So whereas it's because it's a 2-way fund, like money goes in, money goes out, money goes in, money goes out. And the money going in is consistent. Like ideally it's an automatic monthly, okay, the example I gave, you're putting $600 a month in because that's the average you expect. But money will come out, and that's okay. It's okay to pull money out of your rotating savings account. Whereas the emergency fund really should be a one-way street. Money comes in, and then once you hit your goal, 6 months of expenses, it just sits there. And it doesn't come out.
If we like this idea and we're saying, okay, I want to employ this strategy, obviously the first step is you need a separate account for this. A key aspect of a rotating savings account is that it's a separate actual account, right?
Mm-hmm.
What else should we know, and how else should someone prepare to start using one? Let's say that this idea just clicks and they're like, oh, I need that, right? What are the steps to get started to use this effectively and kind of think about those lumpy expenses? How do I go through that exercise of determining what should go in, what I should budget inside of there.
As far as getting to like Robinson's question, I would recommend, like, I like high interest savings accounts for those. They're not really high interest today. They're like 0.5 or 0.4% now. But like places like Ally or Goldman Sachs Marcus, American Express has one, Capital One has one. Ally is, one thing I like about Ally is that you can actually, within one bank account, for your rotating savings, you can segment it into like, oh, this much is for my auto repair, this much is for this, and out of the inflows that come in each month, you can say, okay, this it breaks down into those buckets. If you want to keep track of it that way, I like Ally for that, and that's what I use personally.
So far, we've named a few things that go into rotating savings, and I just want to keep going on this one because I'm interested in this personally for my household. So far, I went through this with my wife, and we made a list of, we basically looked at the calendar and found that was the easiest way to kind of visualize what's going to happen. So we had a family vacation plan with her family, right? There's going to be some costs associated with us doing that. We want to see one of her friends who's in graduate school.
Where are you going?
We're not going. We were going to go to Hawaii, but we're not going. Quarantine stuff is too bad. A few things that are a little just chunky and out of the ordinary. So like anniversary gifts, birthday gifts, and then just like some stuff that we want, just straight up like material purchases that we're like, yeah, we can afford to do this year. So we just started doing outdoor rock climbing, and like, you got to pay for the gear for it to be safe. You don't want to use the old crap. So like, we put that in there too. So besides vacations, gifts, what other kind of left field things should we be thinking about that might fit into rotating savings, with the idea that otherwise they might throw off your monthly budget or might throw off your emergency savings?
I think you're thinking about it the right way. I think I'd add repairs is a big one, like figuring out what's normal for auto and home repairs. If you're going to owe any kind of income tax, if you expect to owe it based on last year, that's a really good one.
Is this an account that would be fair maybe to even use for your short-term funding goals, like down payment on a house? Is rotating savings appropriate for that?
You could, you absolutely could. I would segment. I would use something like Ally to segment it, or at least mentally have a segmentation then of like, okay, this much is for the down payment. Otherwise, it's very easy to use it all in the vacation. You could. Different people have different, like some people, if they have a really big goal that they're going to be working on for several years, like to open a separate account for that, and that's okay. I don't necessarily encourage proliferating a ton of accounts, but you could very easily open, a secondary, another account at the same institution for just that. But I think the revolving account is good for something like that. House purchase, car purchase. I had a really good story with some clients who had been waiting to buy a car, and they didn't realize they were going to need to replace their car, but they had been putting into the revolving savings for quite a while. And what they needed for the down payment on that car, because they did need to get a car loan, they just had it in the revolving savings, so that was nice. And they had to factor in, okay, this means our vacation's going to get pushed out, and et cetera, et cetera. But that was very good instead of going on a credit card.
I tried to separate between living and lifestyle expenses.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest cut, and then once I have that, I can figure out more or less what is the essential emergency fund for living, and then something that probably could be a little bit more adaptable, which is lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm actually very interested in hearing what you do.
I really like that, and I've used that approach, and I think that's a really good one. I think with the clients I work with, I have a very specific breakdown that I use because we're really actively working on this, and it works well with the kind of flow I use with folks, which is I break it down into three categories. The first one is recurring expenses, so things that are going to happen every month, and whether that's a lifestyle or a life thing. So your HBO Max subscription goes in that bucket, as does your rent. and you can aggregate those up to like entertainment subscriptions is a bucket I have under there, and rent and bills and etc. But the thing with that macro bucket is when I'm reviewing my own monthly budget or with clients, I just want to look at that very quickly. Like I want to look at that aggregate and just be like, all right, do these all check out? Yep. Okay, great. Let's move on. Or if there's a variance there, you can very easily say, oh, well, why was our subscriptions twice the amount that it normally is? Because these are monthly costs, and then you can figure out what's going on there. The other thing is it's just very transparent. What are all the things you're paying for each month with that approach? The second category macro category I use is day-to-day expenses. So that's things like dining out, groceries, and things of that, entertainment, things of that nature that are just going to happen on a monthly basis. And that's usually where I spend the most time focusing with clients, is on those, because those are a lot more controllable. We do an audit of the recurring expenses, but once you've done that, it's done. And the third one is planned expenses, and those that maps perfectly with the things that go into the revolving savings account. So some people might call them these like the unexpected expenses or unusual expenses, but they become planned expenses when you put money towards them for the long term. And so that's the things like vacations and repairs and things like that just aren't going to come up every month. But when they come up, you want to make sure you have money for them.
Vineet, how do you structure a budget in a partnership with your spouse or with your partner? How does one start from scratch there?
The first thing I would say is I think transparency is important, especially if you're married or in a long-term partnership. If both people are open to it, I think it is good to have kind of one central repository of all your inflows and outflows. And I think like I met with some clients recently where they kind of initially both assumed that they wouldn't want that, and they talked about it and they were like, no, actually it would be nice to be able to have that transparency across our total finances. So I would recommend using something like Tiller, or if you don't like spreadsheets, Mint or YNAB is another one, to just pull in all of your transactions between the two of you. And then when you're making the budget, I think it's important to distinguish what are the line items on the budget that are joint versus what are the line items that are individual, like this person's line item. And so that's where the three buckets that I mentioned, you might create a fourth or a fifth one for like, partner A's expenses and partner B's expenses. And the thing that the differentiation there is that if partner A wants to make a big purchase and it's it's this like budget line item that's, clothing, let's say, like Stephanie and I both have our own clothing budgets, and we don't have to ask this is not a joint decision. Even if we want to spend a lot on clothing, we just look at our clothing, line item, and we are like, yeah, I'm good on that. Cool. I'm going to buy that. Whereas if we were to buy something for the home that was expensive, that's a shared line item. We'd consult each other about that.
On the practical side, if you're using Tiller, for example, don't they only pull in the first 2.5 months of data?
They do. And what I usually do with people is I will ask them to categorize, we'll establish the categories that are correct for them, and you and your partner should do that, like figure out what are the right buckets. But then I say go back and do the last full month and the current month. So, right now when we're recording this, it's February 3rd. So I'd say do all of January and do February so far. I don't think you need to go back and do several months, because that's like a lot of admin work to get started on budgeting. I just say look at the last month and understand what that looked like for your baseline.
Sometimes I would say clients forget that they have big ticket items coming up. Mm-hmm. How do you go about that process of reviewing the big ticket items that will show up in the next 12 months or something?
I usually do it. I usually start the first time I'm working with someone. I just have them think through like the next like month, like what are the big unusual expenses that are coming up, and then we'll expand out from there. Like the next time we meet, like, okay, now let's think about over the next 3 months, like what are the big ones, and then over the next 12 months. Because I try to make the entry point into the first time you do it, budgeting as easy as possible. But I think the calendars are really good. Looking through the calendar, asking yourself like what and maybe thinking about last year and thinking about what were the like times, in my use cases, a lot of folks end up putting stuff on credit cards. So what were the things last year that we had to put on a credit card? Is another way to figure out the big expenses you need to plan for.
And how do you think about credit cards and rewards? I personally find this an intriguing area, but also potentially a massive distraction from what's actually important. How do you feel about credit card rewards and those games and people using those as part of their plan or weaning off those?
How many credit cards do you have?
I don't want to talk about it. I'm not gonna put that on air.
I think it can be a really big distraction for the vast majority of people. I think there are, for people, especially in the FIRE community, who are financial independence community, who are saving, 40, 50, 60% of their income, and like travel rewards, travel hacking is this like fun hobby that they have on the side, which I was in that category for a little while. Like, I think that's fine. And I don't think they're going to, for the most part, the studies say otherwise, but I think a lot of folks in that situation probably aren't going to spend a lot more than they normally would. Otherwise, for the vast majority of people, I think just an easy, like if you are going to use a credit card, I think an easy like cashback card is just the best way to do it. I know Citi Double Cash has a 2% back card. I think that's, along with Fidelity's 2% cash back, those are the highest two on the market. So I think those are good cards to get. And then just use those. As far as like stepping back and saying like, is it smart to use a credit card in general? My philosophy has generally been, even I know you and I have discussed, there are studies that show like if you use cash, you will spend less money. Like if you use a debit card, you will probably spend less money. But I'd say if folks have consistently paid off their credit card in full every month, like that's what I do, and I use a 2% cashback card. And I think psychologically, like I think about it the same way I think about a debit card, because I'm paying it off in full every month. If you currently have a balance on a card, I highly recommend just not using it at all while you're paying it down, because it's psychologically very difficult to have it go up and down as you put more money on it.
Vineet, what is a good savings rate?
I think that the first place to start with this is before just giving a number, is the first thing is to understand what your savings rate is. 95% of people wouldn't know or wouldn't have an accurate guess. So just like understand what it is by tracking. Then after that, a good savings rate is a little bit higher than your last month, like trying to build it up slowly. After that, like I think, the general, like the Elizabeth Warren, like, what is it, 50, 30, 20, 50% on your needs, 30% on your wants, 20% on savings. I think that's a reasonable, like 20% plus, I think is a good savings rate. I think that generally works out for you, long term. I think though, breaking that down, ideally I'd like it to be higher, of course. And I think, I think about that on a post-tax basis. So a lot of people are like, well, but I'm contributing to my retirement. And it's like, well, but you also probably, likely have some goals that are not retirement for your savings. And so I like that kind of 50, 30, 20 split from your post-tax money, and trying to get to that 20% is, I think, a good just number in your head, but know that at the beginning, if you're way below that, it's just good to build up to it over time.
So would you consider the 401k part in that calculation of the savings rate?
I don't generally. I generally try to look at everything on a post-tax basis, for at least what I do around cash flow, and then, let brilliant minds like yourselves think about, how much you should be contributing to 401k, which in my case, like personally, I just have always been fortunate to be able to max it out. But I think that doing it on a post-tax basis and still trying to have, that 20% savings on a post-tax basis is a good goal, at least.
I like that too. It's a simplifier for your calculations, and there's many mines that you can step on in this minefield of budgeting and cash flow management, and getting confused about pre and post tax savings, I think is like just a classic difficult one. I've personally struggled with that one as a business owner. It's a strange thing to have your business expenses, your personal expenses, pre-tax, post-tax. You can make yourself confused pretty quickly there. So I like Vineet's advice there a lot to say, all right, if we're doing savings rate stuff, stick with post-tax and see if you could make that one work first.
And to that point, like I think a lot of people have asked me the question, like, how do you calculate savings rate? And for me, it's how much are you earning post tax? How much are you spending on average? And then what's the difference between those divided by your income, post tax income?
One of my questions here is like, what do people struggle with when they're trying to essentially execute on the budget, not or execute on their target goals? Where are they're struggling the most?
They have general plans and not specific plans. And so that's actually what I spend a lot of the percentage of my time when I'm meeting with people, meaning that, again, like someone says, I use dining out as an example because it is the most common example of where people say, I want to spend less on this. I want to spend this much, and I'm actually spending 2 or 3 or 4x that amount. So, okay, someone tells me last month their goal was $800 for the month on dining out. They actually spent $1,100. How do we get that down? I like to be very tactical about it. Like, okay, on what days are you going to meal prep? On what will you replace your specific spending. So a great example was I had a client who, as we discussed it, we decided like she was no longer going to eat out for Saturday brunch. She did Saturday brunch every day at a really nice place, but she was like, I could cook. And then we went through, okay, well, in order to make that happen, like what are the obstacles? It's Saturday morning. Like what's stopping you from doing that? Like, okay, I don't have groceries in the fridge. So, okay, when do you grocery shop? So like really mapping, like breaking down the problem of spending. I like the quote, like every problem is just this smaller set of problems, if you break it down. And so like, okay, how do you get very tactical so that you can figure out how you're actually going to make this spending decreases happen? And then going back and revisiting, okay, when we next meet, okay, what happened with that specific plan? Okay, you didn't actually have groceries. Why, what happened there? Okay, you got really busy. Okay, should we consider grocery delivery, even though it's a bit more expensive, to make sure that groceries get there, and that you on Saturday can make brunch every week so that in the end you actually save $300 for the month versus went out. That kind of tactical level of planning I think helps a lot. And when people are just generally like, I'll spend less on clothing next month, it generally doesn't work out as well.
One more technical question for you. I know we're beating you up on this. Do you prefer, from time to time, you're going to have people who are in debt or working towards paying off like a debt pay down goal, right? That's probably square in the middle of something that you do with people a good bit. Do you have a natural preference between, and could you explain both the debt snowball method or the highest interest rate method?
My understanding, debt snowball is you pay the smallest debt off first, regardless of interest rates, and debt avalanche is you pay the highest interest rate debt first, which is the kind of mathematically optimal approach. I usually, when I'm helping clients prioritize debt, and if you're doing this yourself, I recommend doing it as well. Like I'd first actually put them in the order that you like. What do you want to pay off first, second, third? Like what excites you the most? Maybe, people have some debts that really stress them out and some that don't. So I kind of first put them in that order and then look at the interest rates and see like, okay, if your debt number one is at a 5% interest rate and debt number two is at a 25% interest rate, definitely, keep that in mind. And I have people calculate, I help people calculate kind of how much interest they're paying on each of their debts. And I tend towards the avalanche. Like I like, mathematical efficiency, but there's also a huge psychological gain with paying off debt. So it's not like I don't use a black and white because, for example, Robinson, if like there's a debt that's at 6% and there's like $1,000 left on it versus a debt that's at 6.5% and there's like $50,000 left on it. It's like, we might want to take care of that one, build up a quick win on that 6% loan, and then move on to something else.
If you could turn back time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell him?
Generally, I would say I was a very ambitious 18-year-old and wanted to, be a CEO of a large corporation or something like that. And I would have tried to tell myself, like, it just enjoy the experience of, your career and, your college experience more so than trying to get from A to B to C to D. Because, I've, like most people in their 20s, like I've had transitions and realized, okay, maybe this is not what I want. And I think just trying to enjoy the day-to-day experience of what you do instead of being knowing where you want to go, but not being too focused on that. And then the second financial piece of advice I would give myself, the biggest mistake I'd say I've made was like the classic one around, being afraid when there's a bit of a market dip and pulling money out, and then later being like, okay, that's not a good idea. And I lost, good amount of money that way, and then put money back in, and then later decided I'm just going to have a plan with what I want to do with my money, and I'm not going to deviate from it. So I'd maybe remind myself of that, but I think to some degree it's a lesson that maybe you have to learn by yourself, but hopefully it's not too painful of a lesson. Hopefully, hopefully you're working with someone like Robinson or Gabe, before that, and don't have to learn the painful lesson.
Thank you so much for both your expertise and for making the time here. Where can our listeners connect with you online? Are you putting out any content that people can tune into?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I do have a podcast/YouTube show that is called Saving Circle. So if you look that up, you can find me. The easiest way to find that, though, is probably at my website, savingsacademy.com. It has all the podcasts and links to the YouTube show. So savingsacademy.com.
One question, like if someone wanted to work with you, what is the type of person you work with, and what's the process there?
If people are interested in working with me, I always just start with a free conversation, phone call, where we can both assess whether working together would be a good fit. And if not, I'm happy to direct you, elsewhere, provide you resources. And if so, I work with people around increasing their savings, spending in a way that's more aligned with their values, and generally like building their financial knowledge and acumen and confidence.